thank you, Steve, even though I just said it. You'll always be Sir or Mr. Barbuto to me. I've been asked to speak briefly about the highlights of my schooling life at this 50th anniversary of Fairvale High. Entrusting a barrister to speak briefly about anything is a difficult, dangerous proposition, but I'll do my best to maintain that because there's other things that people want to get on with. This school has a great deal of personal significance for my family tree, not just for myself. Prior to my time at Fairvale High, my mother attended between the years 76 and 79. Across the road from Fairvale High, from the front of the school, at 20 Thorney Road, Fairfield West, is the first and last house that her parents had bought in 1966, at a time when house and land packages cost below 5 figures and interest rates were in the healthy double digits. In my mother's time, it was relatively uncommon for students to go on to years 11 and 12, particularly if they had no intention of going off to university. The school certificate was a reliable prerequisite to the world of vocation and trade. In my time, I recall many of my peers elected to undertake senior schooling regardless of whether or not they had any plans for tertiary education at either university, college or TAFE. My grandparents migrated to Australia as adults and consequently could not read or write English at all and had substantial difficulty speaking the language, although they managed to get by. They would wait for me outside school at 20 Thorney Road on most days for a quick hello and exchange about my day, excited to see the growth and development of one of their many grandchildren. They didn't pretend to understand all that I was studying, particularly as I progressed throughout high school, but they always expressed interest and encouragement. They would also frequently speak ill of their own walk of life for not having the benefit of proper education. None of their self-criticism was true, of course. They had achieved a great many things that I could only hope to achieve in my lifetime. But their repeated critique stressed the importance of education to them. As both of them are now no longer with us and are hopefully in a better place, I recall this school and those memories very fondly. For my nuclear family, education was even more of a priority. Any of the teachers here who remember my family would remember that. My dad would place a great deal of value on education. Because of course he had seen what the world is like without being sufficiently educated. And for my mother, education was a top priority because it's inherent in her nature to have patience and be teacher-esque in her empathy. As Sir said, I attended Fairvale High between the years 2000 and 2005. I must admit that saying that out loud as we approach 2020 is somewhat confronting. During the time, I learned the basics of several languages, musical instruments, woodwork, metalwork, home economics, and what might be described as the more traditional core education subjects, English, maths and science. In my HSC year, I studied economics, software design and development, Extension 1 mathematics and Extension 2 English. I don't know if they're still called that or anything close to that, but I recall that subject choice at the time required a careful balance between interest and ability on the one hand, and what scaled well, whatever that means, when applied to the matrix of information used to compute what was called a University Admissions Index, or UAI. This thing was something I was obsessed over since starting senior school. I understand that the infamous UAI is called something else, an ATAR or an ANTAR, or whatever the hell it's called, but it's largely the same thing in terms of its computation. I must say I remember these facts without too much mental strain because during my time at Fairvale, as I said, these matters were hugely important to me. The notion that the 4-digit number one receives at the completion of year 12, if they are left to matriculate, is of no real consequence or doesn't really matter is simply not true. Not only does it act as a gateway to university study at first instance, but it also gives students some real perspective as to where they might find themselves academically amongst their peers. I do not think it's controversial that standardised testing, by its very nature, is imperfect and imprecise. But that is not necessarily a high school problem, and indeed remains a significant obstacle when evaluating performance more generally. However, what it does provide is some level of baseline qualitative assessment of students, regardless of resource inequality or information asymmetry. This is important because there is a real and long-lasting harm in allowing a young soul who passionately despises academic plights to believe that professional life rooted in academia is appropriate for them. Some jobs just aren't for some people. The same skill that will allow a student to outrank their peers academically at high school are prerequisites for most professions, as is the stress which comes with the need to perform under pressure. It's just the reality of the job. Put more bluntly, if you hate reading, don't become a lawyer. If you can't stand the discipline of self-study, stay away from an occupation which requires you to be in an office. If you work better with your hands, do that and find a way to capitalise off it. Yes, you may get into law school outside of HSC performance, but there is no real point to incurring expensive government debt, partaking in tertiary study, if you are inherently disinterested in the process of study itself. It sounds simple enough, but experience tells me that this is not the case. And I've seen, now lecturing at UTS in law, many students who don't want to be there, probably shouldn't be there. It can be a very hard message to truly appreciate, but it is an important one. Whilst I accept that the core of your UAI or your ATAR doesn't matter, and that whole movement is inherently loving and nurturing, glossing over performance at high school can be taken too far. High school years are inherently difficult and defining. Lessons not learnt at high school come a lot harder in the years following it, particularly when life takes over outside of parent shelter. You start high school largely as a child and generally finish legally as an adult, whatever that means. That fact alone presents significant challenges for students and for teaching staff alike. I must also say that the notion that a student is ever going to have the same amount of time or patience to go through the HSC process at some later stage in life is utter nonsense in anything other than exceptional cases. I did fairly well throughout the HSC process, and I can tell you confidently that I would never do it again. For that reason, study at high school is important and needs to be taken as seriously as a student can take it, having regard to their own socio-economic circumstances and the reality of each household. And Fairvale is a great example of a diverse range of households and cultural backgrounds. To put it more crudely, the popular maxim, YOLO, or you only live once, is true, not only in respect of daring feats, but also in respect of one's time at high school. If you don't try your best whilst you have the time to take the process seriously, it is unlikely you'll get another chance. That being said, standing here today, I can't tell you what the curriculum for Year 8 mathematics was, nor am I sure that I would be able to explain it to you, even if the material was now before me. What I can tell you is that the teacher who taught me the subject also taught me two broader lessons. First, just because you try your hardest does not necessarily mean that the results will follow. Life is not about meeting expectations, it's about performing and trying your best, but not ever expecting anything to come to you. And notwithstanding the second lesson, notwithstanding the first point, if you want to have a seat at the table, you need to push past distractions and put in the work, whatever it takes. On one view, telling a 14-year-old that they need to give 110%, and even if they do, they can still fall far short of their expectations is quite confronting. I'm fairly confident that at that stage in my life I was more concerned about sporting facial hair on my upper lip and uttering a sentence without my voice cracking. But the substance of both messages remained with me for years to come, perhaps because of the rawness of each of them, even if I was not ready to accept their truth at the time. These lessons can be made good by observation. Law schools around Australia must concede that they enrol far more students than will ever practice law, regardless of the desires of the students themselves. There are simply not enough paying jobs to meet the influx of law students and graduates. To coast along at university, like high school, as though legal brilliance will strike one by off chance one day is not only naive in principle, but if left unaddressed, it is a dangerous philosophy to adopt. Most students realise this far too late into the degree progression. Like any discipline, but particularly the law because of the overachieving personality it attracts, there is a real need to stand out amongst an already impressive pool of candidates and stand out quickly if you want to move up and move up fast. Firms of solicitors call it the need to add value. If you're not adding value, you can't bill the client, they'll complain about it, and you'll need to find something else to do with your time. My Year 12 mathematics teacher, who was Mr. Barbuto, called it the pursuit of fearing mediocrity. It's the same thing, just phrased differently. Having had to grapple with these realities well before undertaking tertiary study, looking back now, I feel as though I had a competitive advantage over my colleagues, not that I had realised that at the time. I'm grateful that certain teachers saw that I could handle the tougher messages that needed to be taught, that they had the foresight to communicate to me in a way which clearly stuck, is in my view the difference between a good teacher and an unforgettable one. Beyond ensuring that the curriculum is taught, an unforgettable teacher endeavours to provide a bespoke learning experience for a group of culturally and academically diverse individuals. My sister, who's in attendance tonight, also a Fairvale High graduate, and now an instructional leader at Auburn North Public School, has been recognised nationally for her continuing work in bespoke education and collaborative learning. I find it challenging enough to adhere to my fiduciary obligations to one client, let alone many, simultaneously. The fact that Fairvale High has had the benefit of a great many unforgettable teachers cannot be chalked up to mere coincidence. In my time, the internet was starting to become a household commodity. The challenge for educators was harnessing the strengths of interconnectivity and mitigating against some of the less desirable aspects of the emerging always-on generation. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. On the one hand, the fact that public school students could access selective and private school past papers went some way towards evening the resource playing field. That was a good thing. On the other hand, the advent of the smartphone and what social media causes impressionable young minds to be exposed to continues to make it very difficult to cultivate depth of learning, discipline and focus. The fall of the paywall jealousy guarding freedom of information has undoubtedly been a good thing for society, public education certainly being no exception to that. The generation of self-entitled youth that have cultivated as a byproduct, perhaps less so. How teachers are managing that balance is, I suspect, an ongoing exercise. The focusing of one's mind to one task and attempting to develop a true and comprehensive mastery of that task or subject matter is not something high school students suffer with in isolation. A significant part of my practice at the bar involves the articulation of advice and preparation of written opinions, often on very discrete legal questions, and the prospects of certain arguments or propositions succeeding before a court in a litigation environment. The mark of a good advocate in 2019 is a master of written communication, just as much as an effective orator in court. In this respect, I recall fondly that the head teacher of English at the time, who was Mr. Christopher Brown, agreed to facilitate myself and a fellow Fairvale graduate. There were two of us. The fellow Fairvale graduate went on also to become a successful in-house solicitor in the study of what had run the first time at this school, and that was Extension 2 English. At 17, I had chosen to write a critical dissertation on the concept of time as a human construct. When I look back at the idea, it is almost immediately obvious that my topic lacked any realistic scope, nor did it benefit from any real hypothesis, two threshold requirements to any good piece of critical writing. It was, quite deservedly, my worst HSC mark, and yet a subject I do not regret taking because of the creativity it offered in an otherwise heavily defined learning rubric. For personalities like mine, learning the hard way is not necessarily a bad thing, because once the lesson is taught, it appears to stick. I say again, I'm most grateful for the belief that many of my teachers vested in me, but not only me, without which such opportunities would not have existed. Unfortunately, the limitless bounds of my critical dissertation on time share an uncomfortable set of similarities with this address. Whichever moments I saw fit to highlight were always going to deny justice to all of the other important developmental moments and milestones which have had a lasting impact on me from my time here at Fairvale High. At the risk of further exceeding the brevity I'm required to maintain, I will save you all further reflection in favour of a final remark, if I may, as to Fairvale High's future. The staff, past and present, ought to be proud of their part in the significant achievement that is 50 years, or 51 years. And I don't know who Hush is, I must say. I have no idea. There's no doubt been a diverse range of students and teachers who have traversed the halls of Fairvale High, and it's fair to say that they have each contributed to the rich traditions of the school, each in their own way. The school motto, "I learn to live," is appropriate not only for a high school, but also for life's broader journey. The simple fact is that the process of learning through living continues well beyond the walls of Fairvale High, regardless of how well or ill-prepared one is to maintain that process. I can sadly say that I have encountered many people over the course of my practice, much older than the students attending this institution, who have not yet truly learned to live. The consequence of disparity between the reality of a situation and one's ability to grasp that reality is often very costly, both economically and emotionally, particularly in a litigation environment. I would implore Fairvale High to continue its demanding and important work to best prepare its students to embrace all that life has to offer and to enjoy the process of learning rather than reveling in the comfort of complacency. In my experience, and if nothing else, an inherently teachable person capable of reflecting and learning from their mistakes is better placed for a happy life than one who, regardless of their circumstances, resists new ideas and change. Congratulations, Fairvale High, for 50 solid years of service to the Fairfield and Canley Vale community. I sincerely wish you well in your next 50 years.